Hello, everyone.
Hello. Hi, everyone. We'll get started very shortly. Thank you so much for joining. If you can just make sure you're muted when you come in as well. We're going to have quite a few people on the call, so just to minimize background noise. Okay, I'll give it a few more seconds just to let people come in. Great. I think we'll get started just for the purposes of time. Thank you very much for joining today's masterclass session on Plain English Summaries, really from the public reviewer perspective. So this masterclass is being run by the NIHR School for Primary Care Research, which for those of you who may not have joined one of our masterclasses before or be aware of us, we're basically a partnership between 9 primary care departments across England. And the aim of the school is really to fund high quality primary care research, but also to build capacity for primary care research through training sessions, focusing on lots of different areas, including public involvement and engagement, such as the one today. To introduce myself really quickly, I'm Hawley. I'm the Public Involvement and Engagement Manager for the school. I'll be helping to facilitate the session today, but you actually won't be hearing that much from me, as we have John, who will be leading the session alongside Corina and Kate, who will be sharing a bit more about their reflections from being public reviewers themselves. Just before I hand over to the team so they can introduce themselves, just a really quick bit of housekeeping. We are recording the session, so this will be available on our YouTube following the session. I'll share the link afterwards so you have that available to you. If you can just keep your microphone on mute at the start, we will have a dedicated time for questions at the end. So we'll answer those at the end. If anything pops into your head, do jot it down or put it into the chat and we'll come to it in that section. We'll be sharing the slides afterwards as well. And just to say, if we don't have time to answer all the questions, we'll collate everything that's in the chat and we'll provide answers to those following the session. So with that done, I will quickly ask the team to introduce themselves. Kate, do you want to go first really quickly? And then Corina, I'll come to you. And then John to start the session.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kate Hawley. I've been involved in patient and public involvement for a few years now, both with the School of Primary Care Research, where I sit on their patient and public advisory group, but then also as a representative at PPI to the School of Primary Care Researchers Board as well. I also sit for the NIHR Academy for the doctoral fellowships, the doctoral clinical and academic fellowships, and the Senior Investigators Award, assessing PPI. So I may well have either assessed some of the applications of the people who have been on this call or will in the future. So really looking forward to kind of giving some hints and tips of kind of what I think a plain English summary should look like. So really excited to get involved. Thanks.
Thanks, Kate. Corina, do you want to go next?
Sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Corina Cheeks. I have also been involved in PPI now for coming up to about 6 years. I have a particular interest in diversity and inclusion. I am currently part of the BRC's Diversity and Research Group, and I've also, in the years that I've been doing PPI, I've also assessed applications as well. And really sort of happy to meet you all, and really keen to sort of share some ideas today.
Thanks both. And I will now hand it over to John to introduce himself and get started with the session. Thanks, John.
Hi, thank you very much. Let me just do a share slide, and that might be the easier way to do it for me. So you just need to let me know when it all powers through.
Yes, we can see that.
That's great. Thank you very much. Okay, well, I'm John McGavin, and I'm a core public contributor to the University of Southampton Centre for Primary Care Research. And in this particular instance, I'm passing on thoughts which have been formed with other people, in particular Tressa Davey, a former colleague in the research centre. My situation is rather like that of a first-year student of mine who said that she had not plagiarised her essay. She had just got her uncle to voice it for her. And that's the role that I'm playing today. I'm voicing this essay for Tressa Davey. We've only got about half an hour on the talk itself, so I thought I'd better let you see what we'll be covering in the time. I will go through it quite quickly so that there's plenty of time for reflections from Corina and Kate, and also some questions from yourselves. You can ask, obviously, what it is, a plain English summary, why it's important, how to get it wrong, and how to get it right, how to write it, to remember who we're writing it for, and there are a few simple rules that one can follow when constructing it. And obviously, the advantage of this being recorded and the slides being made available is that if you miss anything, it's all going to be here for you. There will be some examples. Following that, we'll think about what to include, where you're going to use it, and when to start it. And then there's a slide of useful resources which Hawley has provided for us all. So, well, what is it? First of all, it's a short, simple explanation of your research, which have been written for a particular purpose. It's been written to be understood by everybody, not just experts. Other parts of your application will have been written to be read and understood by experts. And so there will be a distinction, obviously, between what you include for them and what you include for people like me who have no clinical background whatsoever. It should be possible to use this plain English summary on its own to describe the whole research project without the rest of the application. That is, you're going to be using this with different audiences, not just the specialists. And so this has got to be able to explain it, and we'll talk more about that later on. Well, why is it important? Well, for a number of reasons. The first thing is a good quality plain English summary is a requirement for any NIHR funding. And it's a key part of the application form that public reviewers look at when scoring an application, and it can therefore influence the funding decision. I'm not going to be able to make wise comments on whether statistical methods that or the chemical methods that you've used in your application are appropriate, but I can say whether the whole thing makes sense to me as an interested and committed and hopefully supportive layperson. So a good plain English summary increases the chance that you will get your research funded, and therefore it's something to get a hold of from the start. It's a means by which you will be able to convince people of the value of your work, and if they understand what you're talking about, they will be much happier about it and understand its value. Patients and the public, this is very important, cannot be fully involved if the language used is not accessible to everyone. For some people, English is a second or even a third language, and indeed that's true for some researchers, and I think they must have quite a lot of difficulty getting their plain English summary sorted when they're having to choose the various options on how to write it. But keep your mind on the person for whom English might be a second language. Will it make sense for them? Well, what is plain English? And there's a plain English campaign, as you probably all know. It defines it as, quote, a message written with the reader in mind and with the right tone of voice that is clear and concise. That's their definition. We can refine on that over the next 20 minutes or so. It's clear, simple, and to the point. Reasons for that will become clear later on. It's easily understandable to a wide audience because your research project will not just be read by professional clinicians. It avoids complex language. Words are chosen to prevent misunderstanding. It removes barriers and makes information more inclusive. So it is part of an equality, diversity, and inclusiveness agenda. Now, here's an example of how not to use plain English. This is an example of communication going wrong. And I love this one because I can feel the character of the person who was writing it. And the character is a very nice character, I think, that comes through. But have a look at it because you'll see what's wrong. About car parking outside Ward 10 and 11 area of hospital. It is fully acknowledged that on-site car parking is currently very limited. And in this respect, plans are currently being examined with a view to alleviating the problems. One current area of concern is the area adjacent towards 10 and 11 during a recent fire alarm call, which fortunately turned out to be a non-emergency. The fire vehicles had extreme difficulty in manoeuvring in this area. In the event of a real fire, you can rest assured, and the rest of it you can probably read for yourself. You can hear the tone. This person actually cares that you will not find the decisions which are being made for you to be onerous or unsympathetic. May I also ask that it's important that no private vehicles remain in the compound after 4 p.m? The assistance of everybody in this matter is very much appreciated. Now, I'm not sure where this notice was put up, but if it was put up at any point where you might actually have been in the car with 3 or 4 other cars revving up behind you, it would have been inappropriate. It would have been much easier, and I'm sure that some people, like as I did just now, would have ceased reading it halfway down if it had been written like this. Dear colleague, we realise that car parking on site is very limited, and we're making plans to solve the problem. The main difficulty is the area next towards 10 and 11. During a recent non-emergency fire alarm call, fire engines had difficulty getting through this area. In case of a real fire, it's important to keep this area clear of parked vehicles. To help solve this problem, and then it gives you the 2 ways in which you can help solve it. Thank you for your cooperation. Much quicker, easier to read. It doesn't miss out anything significant. It does miss out the bit where there is a vague hint that the fire engines, if they are blocked, will just send your car scattered to one side, but the point is still there. So what did we do? Here's the key differences. It's more direct, it's simpler, and easier to read. It's a lot shorter, from 230 words down to less than half. The sentences are shorter, almost by 2/3. It uses active verbs rather than passive verbs, and we all like, passive constructions. The data will be examined to do such and such, whereas what you really want to say is we will look at the data to do such and such. White space improves clarity. People think, I can get through this message, I can get its meaning, and I'm not being beaten over the head with it. The main instructions, which was, after all, the key point, keep your car out of this area after 4 o'clock, is in bullet-pointed form. People should not have to fight through your words to get your message. Now, there will be a part of your application form in which you can really let rip and speak to your fellow professionals in precise terms about the nitty-gritty of the problem and how you're going to solve it. But for one group of people, at least, those people who are the lay contributors or the public contributors, they will need not to fight through these words. They will need to see what you're saying from your plain English summary. So we don't want to find ourselves in a situation where we're not sure what language we're speaking. Now, the first step in dealing with this is to ask, who are you writing for? You have to think about your audience. Your audience could include members of the public, funding reviewers, the funders themselves, other health professionals like yourself, policymakers and the media, because remember, if your work goes well, the first thing the media are going to do is to come to you and say, have you got anything quick that I can give to my viewers, listeners, or newspaper readers? And that's where you will turn for, that's when you will turn for your plain English summary. Most of these people will not have specialist knowledge of your area of research. And so you've got to be aware that this is the part of your application where you speak to the people who are not aware of it. And this rather awful, shocking information, the average reading level in the UK is that of a 9 to 11-year-old. I'm not sure whether that's a very clever 9 to 11-year-olds. This is similar around the world, and tabloid newspapers target a reading age of 6 to 8 years. You have spent your lives in the company of people for whom that is not the average reading age. And so it takes a little bit of extra work on your part to ensure that it will be available. So here's 7 simple rules. The first thing is to avoid complicated words and jargon. And definitely to explain unavoidable acronyms. There are some acronyms you will have to use, scientific or technical terms, but explain them, please. And if your acronym has to be used again later on in your application or your plain English summary, you can actually explain it again. You've maybe explained it one point in your general professional account of the project, but in the plain English summary, make sure that the reader has a hold on what that acronym or term is. Again, active phrases, not passive phrases. And you should aim for sentences between 15 and 20 words. Can I just say, having spent a lot of my time writing on other things, this is a shocking revelation to me, but this is the case, 15 to 20 words. Break up your text. Use bullet points, numbers, headings, white space, as we did with that rewriting of the car parking announcement. And remember, try to get your punctuation right, because it can save lives. Let's eat, Granny, as opposed to let's eat, Granny. That little comma makes all the difference. And finally, get someone, you can guess who that is, to proofread a draft to find out if anything is unclear. Now, the guess who is preferably somebody who is not a professional. If they proofread your draft, they will quickly tell you what they do not understand, and that will help you to correct it at an early stage. So try it out on somebody who is not a specialist. This is what we're wanting to avoid. You need a constitutional proactive approach to arrest system decline, which means get some exercise or you'll die. And here's a few examples. Simple changes giving plain English. Here's the original. The results indicate a positive correlation between regular physical activity and enhanced cognitive function in the aging population. Our findings show that older adults who exercise regularly tend to have better thinking abilities. Now, I know that some of you will be looking at that and saying, wait a minute, thinking abilities is not exactly the same as cognitive function. There are subtle things here that are being missed, but actually it's enough, is it not, to get the point over? And that's what the lay person needs to know. So here's another one. The study employed a longitudinal design to assess the trajectory of mental health outcomes over an extended duration. I imagine you're already translating it into that. We did a study that looked at how people's mental health changed over a long period. Here's a third one. The study employed a quantitative methodology to investigate the correlation between socioeconomic factors and health outcomes among diverse demographic cohorts. In English, we used numbers to work out how things like money and where people live are connected to health in different groups of people. I think I might have had another go at that and changed it a wee bit, but that is essentially what is being said. It was the money and where people lived and how it affected their health. So there are three examples of what strikes me as very characteristic professional clinical language being changed into something that an ordinary person like me could understand. So what do you have to include in your plain English summary? And this first statement I think is very important. It's not the same as a scientific abstract. Remember, the person who's reading a scientific abstract is probably going on to read the article. And if they're not, it's because they know enough about the subject to get the key stuff out of the abstract. This is not for that kind of person. This is for somebody who is not going on probably to read or understand the scientific paper itself. It should be an overview of your whole study and include the following: the background. What is the problem you're trying to solve, and why is it important to solve it? What do you want to find out? What design and methods have you chosen, and why? And remember, that's an area where you might have to do a bit of thinking to simplify it. How will patients or the public be involved? So involving the public is important. And when will they be involved? How will the findings be communicated and to whom? Will the public be involved in that communication? Will the public be involved from the start of the project, only participating as a patient throughout it, or will they have something to say about the core ideas? And what difference will the research make? So, as an ordinary person coming to that, if I read a paper, if I read a plain English summary like that, I'm going to feel, okay, I understand this is important. I can go ahead and judge this one reasonably. I'll leave the academic clinical judgments to the people who are reading the rest of it very carefully and who understand it, but I can say whether I think this is an important piece of work. Well, where are plain English summaries? They're going to be on your funding proposals, as we've said. They may actually be used on the NIHR and other websites, because that description may be asked for to appear elsewhere, because it's a very good project. Wherever it is, it's going to be the starting point for anyone reading about your research, so you've got to make that first impression count. Show from the first reading that your project is important, that it can answer the research question, that it's good value for money, and that you've got the competence to deliver it. Now, when to start writing a plain English summary, and I think this is, in some ways, is a very important slide, because what I'm going to say is that you should start at the beginning. You should start with the end at the beginning. Start as early as possible to create your plain English summary for various reasons. First is that it will save you time later. It can always be adjusted as the project develops. Almost inevitably, the plain English summary will develop, but it's something that you've got under your belt right from the start. It's the foundation to build on as your research develops. You can use it on patient information sheets, so it's going to be multifunctional. And this is, I think, the most important bit. It's going to give you perspective and research clarity. I mean, I think whenever you start teaching, the ideas become clearer, the shortcuts become less, the intellectual obstacles which you have quietly sidled past when it was just all in your mind cannot be ignored anymore. A plain English summary will help to give you perspective on your work, and it will also, in my view, be part of the research, intellectual research process itself. It will give you clarity. Now, this is a slide of useful resources which Hawley has put together, some suggestions from others. I'm not going to go into them. The Plain English campaign I have already referred to. It may the NIHR guidance has got a Plain English Summaries guidance, and it may be that in your own institutions you also give advice on how to write Plain English Summaries. But anyway, here is a group that we've put together. What I'd like now to do, 5 minutes earlier than I'd planned, is to ask Corina and Kate if they would be good enough to give their reflections on Plain English Summaries, and then we can have the question and answer, which is a very important part of this. I'm going to stop sharing now and return to base. Here we are.
So much, John. Is it all right if I come in first? Is that all right, Corina? Yeah, thanks so much for that, John. That was a very helpful summary of kind of what is helpful and what's not helpful in a plain English summary. So yeah, a few thoughts from me. So I spend so much of my time now assessing these plain English summaries, and I guess my first thing for you is, just in case you weren't aware, the PPI element of your application and the plain English summary element of your application is not going to be a game changer. As in, like, if you have an absolutely stellar scientific application that is recommended for funding, then if you've messed up your plain English summary, or if your PPI isn't what it's supposed to be, then that doesn't stop it from going forward. Instead, it's just issued with funding, but with a PPI condition. So the first thing to say is, please don't be anxious when writing this, because I know how anxiety inducing it is anyway when you're writing research applications. So try and relax when you're writing this, because sometimes when I'm reading them, I'm thinking, I wonder if this individual, this applicant, was so stressed about this whole application that they just have lost sight of how to speak to a normal person in the supermarket. So my first piece of advice is just try not to stress out about it. My second piece of advice is, imagine you've been invited to give a primary school assembly about your research, because honestly, it's that level, right? Don't think about a teenager, think about a 9-year-old who's in your primary school assembly. Think about what you'd say when you go, and how you try and make it engaging when the children are scratching or coughing or looking around and not really being interested. How do you draw people in and say, did you, you can always start your plain English summary with like a fact or something to draw them in. Did you know that more than 50% of the UK will get this, or whatever? Like, make it interesting, make it readable, because ultimately people will just stop reading, because that's the reality, isn't it? Like, unless nobody wants to feel patronized, but also nobody wants to feel like they're stupider than they feel inside. And when I read something, and I am not a scientist, I work in policy and government, when I read something that is highly scientific, it makes me feel bad about myself, right? And so often I just stop reading, or I kind of switch off. And so in order to engage people and make sure that they read your summary, it has to be applicable to them. So think short and punchy. You're given this primary school assembly presentation, right? Short and punchy. I know that John just said 15 to 20 words. I would even argue less. 15, aim for the lower element of that. I mean, I always use a readability formula. So if you don't know what a readability formula is, I'll drop one in the chat. Definitely use that before you submit your application. Put your plain English summary through a readability scoring formula, and it will tell you what the reading age is. And the vast majority of ones I get through have a reading age of 23 or above. And it also says what level of education it thinks you need to understand that summary. And very often it will say you were expected to have a college degree and be 23 years or above to understand this summary. And that is completely out of scope for 95% of the British public. Okay, so put it into a readability formula and make sure that you're aiming for I mean, the ideal is a rating age of 10. It's really hard anecdotally to get your plain English summary down on those readability formulas down to age 10. But you can often get it to age 12, age 13, something like that, and that is better. That is much better than 20 years old and a college degree. And also, finally, it's as much about the structure and the sentence length than it is about the words that you're using. So use subheadings. I cannot tell you how frustrated I am when I just get given a block of text and I think to myself, that's just not, I mean, neurodiversity aside, of which many people in the UK are neurodiverse, it's difficult to stay engaged when you're just reading a block of text, especially if it's not about something that you're particularly interested in. So put subheadings, introduction, background. What is it we're trying to do? Do not use the word methodology. I've seen that so many times as a heading. Methodology is not a plain English word. Say, how are we going to do our research? ? That can be the subheading for that section. How are we going to tell people about our research? Don't use the word dissemination. Dissemination is not a plain English word. So again, just imagine you're talking to a primary school audience. What would you say to them? How are we going to share this? What are we going to do? What do we think the benefits are going to be of this? Like, it's very unlikely that it will read patronizing, even if you think it does because of your intellect level. It's very unlikely that it will read patronizing, and ultimately it will be for the best. Sorry, my final thing, I realize I'm very, very close to my 5 minutes. My final tip is there are certain words that we are tricked in the medical profession to think are plain English. And I swear to you, they're not. And I'm not in the medical profession, but even now I find myself using them because that I've spent enough time with you all, wonderful people, that I think that they're plain English. Here is one. Intervention. Intervention is not a plain English word, okay? When you say intervention to someone on the street, they think about sitting down with their friend who's got a drug problem and telling them to stop taking drugs. That's an intervention. Let's stage an intervention, right? That is not a plain English word. Avoid that at all costs. And I see that all the time, and I mark people down so badly for it. So intervention, not a plain English word. Technologies, not a plain English word. Like, what technologies we'll be using, or we'll be testing this technology. When I think of technology, I think of like my iPhone or like the newest Samsung television that I might be getting at the weekend. Like, it's not plain English. Say it like how it is. So intervention, we're going to create an app, or we're going to make some pamphlets to give out at the GP surgery. Like, just don't use those words. Those are kind of the two words I can immediately think of off the top of my head. I'm sure I'll think of others. And I'll drop that readability formula scoring thing in the comments. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kate. That was a really good overview, and I'm very conscious that I don't want to kind of duplicate anything you said. Really helpful kind of initial sort of tips. And I suppose I'm looking at it in an equal kind of, from my perspective, I suppose. And when I'm reading plain English summaries, I have many of the same frustrations. And I think the other thing that I'm very conscious of is that there is an element of being concerned that you're being patronizing. And actually, in my experience, sometimes there have been people that have gone the other way, and it's oversimplification of what they're trying to get across. So I completely appreciate that can be challenging. And I suppose what I would say to that is, think about your PPI members in your study that you've worked with. Would they be able to fully understand what you've written in that plain English summary? Would it make sense to them? Would they feel like that's an accurate representation and it makes sense to them? So I think that is probably where to gauge it, because it does become, I can appreciate it becomes quite onerous to be thinking all the time about, is this an oversimplification? Is it actually factually correct? Is it a word that isn't plain English at all and is going to be difficult to understand? So that's a really sort of key point, I'd say, from my perspective. I think the other thing to be mindful of is that plain English covers a whole range. So it's people with low reading ages, but it's also people for whom English isn't their first language. So consider that. Consider using plain English, of course, but think about the words you're using. So plain English is obviously, it's a huge umbrella. There's words within that, in that kind of vocabulary set that are better than others still. So it's not just about making sure, right, I've ticked the box, it's plain English. It's making sure that the words you're using they're helpful, they're easily digestible words, you know, they're sort of bite-sized. So I think that's something that I've kind of come across quite a lot. A really key point that Kate's made about the headings, you know, I prefer having a breakdown by heading quite clearly laid out of what is in the study, what you're going to do in your work. And I think that is pretty universal as far as I've seen. I'm yet to meet anybody who doesn't like a nice clean breakdown. And I think that will help to guide you, and it will make sure that you're not omitting anything that's really important for people to know. So I think the other thing, you know, with a plain English summary is to be thinking about, you know, you've got a short word count, but you also have to be very mindful that you're not omitting huge chunks of information, but also that people can see why you're doing the work, which is really, really important, and why you're doing it. And the other thing is including why does this matter to them? Why does this matter? So, for example, I'm a layperson. I'm not from a medical background at all, and I want to know the populations, you know, the people in my community who this will impact. So make it clear, 1 in 10 or 50% of people are affected by this, or members of the community, because I want to understand, what is this going to mean in real terms? If you get the funding, what do you expect to be doing with that? And, you know, you've got to bear in mind that, for example, when I'm doing reviews, I'm told only review the PPI element. You don't have to review the whole application. I choose to review the whole application, but I'm not asked to. But when I'm giving feedback, I'm asked to give a full score based upon just the plain English summary. So let that marinate. That's quite scary, I can imagine, for quite a few academics. So just be really mindful that actually, in some cases, some people who are part of your review panel will only have read the summary, the top line plain English summary, who is involved in the study, their expertise, and maybe a little bit of information about your costings and how much you expect to be spending. So, you know, whilst I appreciate that most people won't, you know, most members won't just read that, just sort of imagine that that's the case, because that is literally the stipulation. So yeah, I'm very conscious I don't want to run over. The other thing I wanted to say is just around your PPI members. This isn't necessarily about plain English, but it's definitely something you should include in your plain English summary, and that is about your PPI members and the continuity of their input. So don't just talk about within that plain English summary, don't just say we have this many PPI members who have got this background, or they're co-applicant because of X, Y, and Z. Talk about very briefly in a one sentence, we have included this person, but during before application, we intend to include them throughout the study in this way, and we intend to inform them, etc., after the study with what we're going to do with that data. That's what I'm looking for. So I want that to be clearly written, but I want it to be alluded to as well. So yeah, that's my initial feedback.
Thanks, everyone. That's really helpful. Lots of, I think, very useful tips from your perspective of reviewing as well. And thanks again, John, for such a clear presentation. We've got about 20 minutes now for questions. We've had a few already in the chat. And hopefully, Charles, we've already potentially answered a little bit about the how do you avoid being patronizing from Kate and Corina's reflections. But if you do feel like we could touch on that a bit more, do just let me know in the chat and we can come back to that. I'll come to one question in the chat and then I'll come to you, Tanjita, next. And this is a question from Carl, and we did suspect that a question like this might come up, and the question is, do you recommend the use of AI, so artificial intelligence tools, to write the plain English summary? And I think we all have different views on this, but I'll open it up to the team to talk about it. John, do you want to go first, and then Kate?
I would just like to beg you not to. I'd like you to. This is a very human. This is the human point of contact for the application. I think that was a very interesting question. I don't know what Kate and Corina will answer to this, but to me, the plain English summary is the point where the clinician who is researching reaches out and touches the people who might be on the receiving end of the research. And to me, it's very important that a human being speaks.
Thanks, John. Kate, and then Corina.
Yeah, I guess I'm maybe have a slightly different view. I massively hear what John is saying, and I think that is correct, that ultimately it needs to have a human touch. That being said, AI is a tool, or machine learning is a tool that I think can be a very helpful tool. And I don't think that there is anything wrong with asking AI for some help. But ultimately, it needs to be written by yourself. Like, the last possible thing you should do is put your scientific summary into ChatGPT, ask it to write a plain English summary, and then copy and paste that and be done with it. But why don't you try putting your scientific summary into ChatGPT and asking to write a plain English summary, and then seeing what ChatGPT comes out with, and then using that to then write it yourself? Like, use it to kind of give you ideas, because ChatGPT or AI might give you some ideas as to how to phrase things in a plain English way that perhaps, due to your own immense intellect, or the fact that you are surrounded by people who have such a way of speaking, that you may not have thought of. So I'm not saying don't use it at all, but I am certainly saying do not use it to do all of your AI, to do all of your plain English summary. But I don't think it's bad to use it as a tool, as either a starting point or to help you try and phrase things. That would be my personal view. Thanks.
Thanks, Kate. Karina, do you want to jump in? And then Carl, I see you've got your hand up to respond as well.
Yeah, so I am coming at this. So my day job is I'm a marketing and communications manager. So of course I've got a very strong opinion on this. I actually think that AI is a really helpful tool. And I think the key is using it correctly. So I would definitely echo Kate's point about the work should be your own. You should have already written the piece. It's not there to start from bare bones. It should be there to refine and finesse your work. Now, the things I would say are, quickly just go into YouTube, type in best keywords for AI. It will tell you what to tell AI. And it will be, it'll be keywords such as don't be over familiar, don't use jargon, don't use acronyms. You can tell AI to do those things for you, and that will save you time. And the other thing is, let's be completely honest. Your counterparts and other people applying will be using AI. It's inevitable. It's everywhere, and it's something we have to come to terms with. But use your integrity as well. Use your integrity. You have to make sure that the work's your own. And the other thing is that if you've just asked it, AI to come up with it from scratch, we can tell it's not a human, essentially. It still feels robotic. So I'd say, use it to finesse your work, utilize it there. It's there for you to use, but just be mindful that, it needs to feel like it's accurate, an accurate representation of your work.
Thanks, Karina. Carl, did you want to just jump in to respond?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I did want to. I know I agree with Karina and Kate, and I put it in there, and I should have probably put. I wasn't thinking from starting from scratch. I was thinking it was Kate's comment where she had like a block of text, but actually my other question was that block of text Kate talked about, which is like too much to structure and give you ideas. Like I've never done it, but like just say, could you make it a reading age of 7? I was thinking even that, like just to help get those words in the right, what? Because all right saying a reading age of 6, 7, but what does that really mean? Like, right. So that was kind of the other way, was words could, maybe the other question would be from a reading age point of view, would it, I've never actually tried it, has it assist in that? But I agree totally. I totally agree with, take it as an ideas platform and then write it in your own words and your own bit, and you need to start with something. Anyway, I know Karina might have an answer from a marketing background about the age bit, the age score.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite comical. It will come back it will be really, really basic to the point where it's insulting. So, okay. you could, and that's the other thing, is that there are different AI platforms that are better than others. Yeah. So I'd say ChatGPT would probably come back with the worst case scenario. I don't use that one. Yeah. So, but there's other platforms. Claude, for example, something that I would recommend. It's much more intuitive.
Yeah, Microsoft Copilot, I'm finding is getting better.
So there's
Google's Gemini, is better. Yeah, I would stay away from ChatGPT as well. But yeah, okay. Yeah. Just to also say, I know our library services, our librarians of the world are really looking into it as well. So I think that was part of my question, was like, it's a world that's growing. We need to understand it, but our support services around us are definitely looking into it as well as tools. Anyway, we better move on. I might be all.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. I think really important to bring it up because it is quite topical, and I think I personally just want to reiterate that the AI element should never replace actually talking to people. Like, I think I agree that it's good to have an initial like idea of what you could write, but you know, you should also be sharing that summary with the public. And I don't want to see AI, I guess, replace that. And I think it raises interesting implications for saying, how did you develop your plain English summary? Because often you'll see researchers say, oh, my plain English was co-developed with members of the public. In the future, we're going to be seeing people saying, oh, mine was co-developed with AI and the public. So it's just interesting. And I expect there'll be further guidance coming out about that in the future as well. But I will go to Tanjida next, because I know that she's had her hand up for quite a while. So yeah, Tanjida, go ahead, and then we'll go to some questions in the chat.
Thank you, Holly. First, I want to say thanks to John for a nice presentation. It was really, very clear and understandable, and you explain all the, points, whatever in my mind, because English is not my first language. So it's really, helpful, and I agree with all your points you highlighted in this presentation. And I want to say the plain English summary is, important for all the PPI members, because sometimes when we need to review the documents, some researcher or any other professional send us to review it, because recently I reviewed 12 abstracts, and I checked everything, and I need to give the feedback, but it's depend on who are sending to you, because the researcher was very, straightforward, and she explained very nicely to me, look, there are so many things which is scientific, and there is so many statistics, and most of the medical word maybe you won't understand, but it doesn't matter. You just need to give your feedback. What do you think about it? There is explanation, it's really important, So when I read the abstract, and I saw, yes, there is so many hard advanced word, which is, only the medical professionals can understand, but I can write in the comment as well, oh, these few words I didn't understand, something like that. So it's really helpful when they explain to us, as a PPI, when I will review and giving feedback, at that time it will be easier for us as well, because they already explained, how we can give the feedback. And I have one question to Kate. She mentioned about the intervention and methodology. You mentioned it's not a plain English. So which alternative we can use for that word, if you know that? Because most, if I know the English and most of the words, because I am involved as a PPI, and I am involved as a community researcher in so many projects, but most often we use the intervention word. So I just want to know, because it's quite hard for my community as well to explain them what the intervention is. I need to explain it, so it took time. So if you say which easy word we can use, then it will really helpful,
Yeah, thanks so much for your question. And just quickly, I've put the readability formula in the chat. Apologies, I forgot to put that in after I spoke. And do you know what? I'm going to be really, really honest with you. Having reviewed hundreds and hundreds of applications, I'm still not 100% sure what intervention means. If I'm being really honest with you, I think it means something different in like every application. It seems to just be the kind of mechanism by which they're trying to make the change, or whatever the outcome is going to be. So I'm not sure if there is like a plain English.
No worries.
I would literally just
no worries. It's not the exam. I just wanted to know if you know something, then it will be helpful for me as well to explain my community people. Oh, that's the easy word for the intervention. I know what the intervention, when we do something, and we can get everyone together, and we share our ideas, something like that. So if we have the easy word to explain to them, then it will be helpful for us too. And when it comes to the AI, so I think because plain English summary, if you write down something and it's totally different from AI, if we put something in AI, it will rephrase the sentences, but sometimes it comes out quite complicatedly, like they show us 2 or 3 alternative sentences. Sometimes it changes the meaning as well. Like I am not, English is my second language, so I need to understand what the words mean. Sometimes when we will, using the AI tools, they gave us the different sentences. Sometimes maybe its meanings, changes, and it gave us the different views. But if I don't understand, I rely on the AI then and take this sentence, but which one, which information is not correct, so we need to make sure.
Thanks, Tanjita. We've got one more comment in the chat. Let me scroll back up because everyone's been posting very useful resources. And it was a question from Rosa, which says, do you think it is a good idea to include a public involvement member as a collaborator on a fellowship application? Or do you think that shows you are delivering involvement activities to the public involvement member? Rosa, are you there? Do you mind giving a little bit more context if that's okay? And I think maybe Kate might be quite well placed to answer this. I know she reviews fellowship applications.
Rosa, are you able to expand a bit on that, or I can just sort of answer what I think you're trying to ask? It sounds like maybe you're not able to come on camera, which is fine. Okay, so my answer would be yes. I think it's always really, really good practice to have a co-applicant that is a PPI co-applicant, right? Or again, because I don't write research applications myself, I'm never quite sure about the terminology, but I definitely see that as a good thing. That being said, that does not necessarily mean that you have good PPI in your application, right? Just because that you have a co-applicant or you have somebody that is either heavily involved in PPI or have done a lot of PPI before, that doesn't necessarily then extrapolate to then a very high score for your application, because it may well be that you've got that co-applicant, but that you haven't planned to make a group that meets regularly enough or has a diverse range of people in it, or your budget's not high enough for PPI. So I would say, yes, it's certainly good practice, but don't lean on that hugely, like it. And if you do have a PPI co-applicant, and I sit as a PPI co-applicant currently on 3 applications that are in, so it is possible. You just have to obviously declare a declaration of interest, a conflict of interest, sorry, if you're reviewing. Get that co-applicant to really test their mettle and get involved. Send them everything. Send them the Plain English Summary, send them the PPI section, send them any kind of research stuff that you've got, and make sure that they have got their fingers all over it. Because again, I've also reviewed a lot of applications that have had a PPI co-applicant or somebody, and they've often really waxed lyrical about how wonderful this PPI member is and how experienced they are. Then their Plain English Summary is terrible. And I'm like, well, clearly your PPI co-applicant is just named, but hasn't looked at your Plain English Summary, or if they have, they must have a much higher reading age than the rest of us. So yes, so I guess, sorry, I'm going on and on, but to sum up, yes, good practice to have a PPI co-applicant. I'd love to see that co-applicant get involved strategically in your fellowship as well, get them on the strategic board, get them meeting with your advisors, get them meeting in kind of the management structure, as well as being involved in the PPI group. But don't just lean on that for your PPI. This is all for another masterclass that Hawley is running about the PPI section, but and make sure that you've really used them to check your whole application before they submit it. Thanks.
John, Corina, did you have anything further to add to that? Or I'll put the link to our next session that we're all doing again in a couple of weeks, because we do go into public co-applicants a little bit more detail and kind of expectations around public involvement sections. Were there any? Go ahead, Corina.
Sorry, just to jump in and answer that. My initial sort of thought was yes, it's I think it's really nice to see co-applicants. It to me sort of evidences a greater depth of inclusion. But one thing, Kate's already kind of covered most of the key points, but one thing is just to make sure that the co-applicant isn't doing all the heavy lifting, and it's not tokenistic, and you've got PPI elements elsewhere. So that would be my initial sort of point. But I think it's a really good idea.
Thanks, all. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I've got one question that I was going to ask, and maybe this is a question for you, John, although others can come in as well. And this is just something I hear a lot from researchers when writing their public involvement sections, and it's really, you ask me to cover all these things in a plain English summary, and you went through the list yourself in the presentation. How do I do all this in 350 words or 400 words, which is the usual kind of word limit for a plain English summary? Do you have any advice?
Well, I think that although these things were laid out as, separate sections, I think some of the things you say will probably do the business for 2 or 3 sections, depending on what you say the problem is and how you're going to go about it. I think you'll probably find that, bullet pointing it as it is on a slide makes it seem much worse than it is in reality. If you cut to the heart of the issue, what is it I'm doing? Why am I doing it? And to a certain extent, how am I going to do it? I think you're going to be able to cut it down quickly. But the important thing is you just think about your reader. And very, very soon, when you do think about the reader, you actually amalgamate a lot of these ideas, which I've separated out in the slide, into one. So I think it may not be as much of a problem as you think if you think about speaking to a person, as Kate said, speaking to a particular primary school group, or speaking to an individual. How would I explain it to somebody? Try explaining it to somebody and see what you have to do. You'll very quickly find that you are abbreviating and condensing, and you can get it done in 300 words or whatever the limit is. That's my own view anyway. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying that the more human you make it, the easier it gets.
Thanks, John. Go ahead.
Sorry, just to quickly jump in. I really think about what needs to be in a plain English summary. Sometimes I worry that the applicants seem to think that everything needs to be in there. But remember, it's just to give the general public an idea of what your research is and the journey of your research. So this is what we're going to be doing. This is the background of the research. This is what we're going to do. This is what we hope it's going to achieve. This is how we're going to share it. There's no need to go into loads and loads of detail. There's really not. And also my final thought is, I have read some really, really boring plain English summaries in my time. I could bore you to tears with the things I've had to read. It's so boring, and it's not. And I'm thinking, what? And then I've interviewed them, right, the applicant, and they've described what they're actually doing in a way that I can understand. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so exciting. What you're doing is so exciting and life-changing and generationally changing. And yet your plain English summary didn't convey any of that. And I just switched off and was like, well, it's something to do with cancer research, I think, something to do with kind of microbes, to do with this. But when they actually explained to me as a normal person, actually this could genuinely change the lives of people who are living with this, or will save lives, blah blah blah, I was blown away. So make it exciting, make it interesting. You want to engage people, and you want people to read this and be like, wow, this research is great. So yeah.
Thanks, everyone. We're pretty much on time, so I'm going to start wrapping us up. But just a huge thank you to John, Corina, and Kate for the presentation and also your honesty. And I think it's very helpful to hear some of your frustrations from reviewing as well, to make sure that others don't make similar mistakes going forward. As I mentioned, we'll share a copy of the slides, and the recording will go up on our YouTube, and I'll share the link for that as well. Hopefully, we'll see a lot of you for our session on the 16th of October at the same time, where we'll delve a little bit more into public involvement sections, that part of the grant application, which John, Corina, and Kate will be leading as well. Thank you all for your attendance and your questions. And if you have any further queries or would like to ask anything of Corina, John, and Kate following the session, do just drop me an email and I'll happily pass that on to them. But otherwise, enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and thanks so much for joining.
Thank you so much, Kate, John, and Corina.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.